First, good evening. What I see is a rapid increase in the spread of the virus this fall and winter, which is what I would expect. Is a seasonal respiratory virus. And I expected it to go down very low in the summer and come back late in the fall and winter. But what we're seeing there's a lot of really good news. And the case fatality rate or the infection fatality rate, they're two different things, are both really staying very flat, very low, which is great news. The number of people going in the hospital, of course, is going up as we have more cases, but still the percentage of people that go in the hospital is, it's looking like it's in the 5%, maybe 3%, depending on the area, as far as number of in the diagnosed cases, which is really good. We're going to see in that group of people, more people die because that's what happens. I mean, you're going to, when you have, right now, I think in the US, we're at 10.5 million cases now today. And when you have that, you're going to have absolute numbers, more people die. So that's to be expected. The spread of it is more in the upper Midwest and in the colder parts of the U.S. But we're seeing it in Tennessee too. I mean, our cases in Tennessee topped 3,600 yesterday, I think, which new cases, which is, that's a jump. And so we're going to see more. We've had, I think the last number I looked at this morning was we're averaging, yesterday I think we had 62 deaths in Tennessee, which is in line with what we would expect the infection fatality rate would be. So we're going to see that. But I think at the same time, the good news, really the great news is that the vaccine that Pfizer has announced the early results of the phase 3 trial and is very positive. The average flu vaccine has an effectiveness of about 50 to 60%, depending on the year. Well, this vaccine now looks like it's about 90+% effective, which is great. I mean, we've never had a respiratory virus vaccine that was anywhere near that. And part of it is that the other part that's really exciting about this is it's a new way to make a vaccine. What they've done, and it is to take the RNA from the virus and basically they can grow it in these huge vats and they can produce vaccine very fast. And then they just take the RNA and inject it directly into the arm and an immune response develops. And until we got this study back, the phase 2 trials just look at safety or how dangerous is it to give it. And the safety trials look really good. Hey, Don. And so the safety part was already checked out. Now this one, phase 3 looks at efficacy or how well does it work. And, it's really good. I think that the statisticians had said initially they needed about 160 people out of the 43,000 to get infected
in the hospital.
And so that they were at 94, I think, this week when Pfizer announced. And I think that's probably going to be enough for the FDA to issue the emergency use authorization, which would allow them to distribute it and get it in use. I think there'll be people who actually get it probably by Thanksgiving. It's coming definitely soon. And
what would you see as a timeline for that getting out?
Well, The military is doing the distribution. President Trump has got this guy who's like a 4-star general over logistics at the Pentagon, who's been charged with making sure it's distributed. I think the first places it'll go are healthcare people and nursing home residents. They've got 50 million doses that will go out this year, 2020. And next year in 2021, 1.3, 1.4 billion. That's only one company and one vaccine. The AstraZeneca vaccine they've got another billion that they're going to produce next year, and they're very close too. I think we'll see kind of a little volley of approvals because everybody's pretty close in the race. And we'll probably have by January 3 or 4 vaccines on the market.
So then how do you know which one you want?
The first one you can get.
Are they all similar? Are they all going to be?
Well, there are some similar and some different. The thing I like about this one is how effective it seems to be and how low the side effects. The RNA it's a novel way to make a vaccine. They've never made a vaccine that's been like this before. And it's a simple thing. And with a 90+% effectiveness, I think that's the one I would want. There will not be a vaccine that is officially licensed for a couple of years because, they're just not going to officially license it until at least a year or two. But by then, I think by next summer, it'll be pretty much over.
One other question. When you said earlier something about the infection fatality rate is different than something else?
The case fatality rate. Yeah, the case fatality rate is the number of deaths from patients who are diagnosed with COVID. The infection fatality rate is the number of people who die who have the infection, most of whom are not diagnosed. You see what I mean?
If they're not diagnosed, how do they know that?
Well, they find out afterwards, and then they statistically derive the number.
And then they say they died of COVID?
Yeah. I mean, basically, they had a lady this week who, this is how it gets kind of in the gray zone. There was a 23-year-old lady who had a baby, came home, seemed to be doing okay, and she'd been home for 3 months after the baby was born, and she died in her sleep. And really no symptoms of anything. And then they did the autopsy and they found out she had congestive heart failure and was positive for the virus. And the virus they could identify in the heart muscle cells. And so they have attributed the death to the virus affecting her heart, even though she had no symptoms. And so we know that and that's really gets into some of the things that are really difficult with the virus because, even though the risk of dying is pretty small, there is a risk that it will cause some long-term effects that we don't yet know. And particularly heart disease and potentially brain disease. A lot of people who have it complain of a mental fog and, that they've got that can last either a couple of days or a few months. And we don't really know how that's going to shake out. There are people who, the loss of the sense of smell and taste is related to what the virus does to these cells that are associated with the taste and smell receptors. And we don't know, how those things are going to turn out. But I think that one of the things is that the vaccine is I think you talk about a potential fairy tale ending for this is to have a vaccine out and given that basically squashes 90% of infections. That is a great thing. The Pfizer vaccine is one that it's given in 2 shots. It's given on day 1 and day 21. And the vaccine has to be stored at basically 80 below zero centigrade, which is colder than most people have in their freezer at home. You know, so it's one of those things. Hospitals have them, and they're available. I mean, you know, you could get one, but that requires planning, and so you got to have a freezer like that to store it, and then it's easy to give. I mean, it's just like every other vaccine that we give. You just you draw it up in a syringe and inject it in the arm, and that's it.
But again, the effect of the virus varies from person to person depending upon their genetic makeup, doesn't it?
There's a lot of variables that go into it. Yeah, genetic makeup is really important. We know that, you know, they've got all kinds of associations with it that they've identified, you know, everything from connection of blood type, which we talked about a little last week, to race, to BMI, your body mass index, to whether you have other comorbidities such as, you know, hypertension, heart disease, diabetes. You know, it's interesting that smoking doesn't seem to have a negative impact on it. And that's kind of a surprise a little bit to me, but, you know, those are things that computers tell them. You know, they basically put all the data in and find out what's correlated and what's
but also, before we leave this topic, when you talk about the infection fatality rate, what has it been? Is it increasing or is it staying the same?
It's staying very flat. You know, when you look at infection fatality rate, I think you've got to break it down to demographics. You've got to look at, so that, you know, the goal of the information is to compare it so you know your relative risk. And understanding that your risk is related to all those things that we talked about, age. We know that, you know, if you're over 85, statistically, it's a 15% mortality if you get COVID. So that's something that just is that way. We know that as you get under 60, it drops dramatically into the, you know, way under 10, probably around 5%. And then as you get under 50 and below, it goes down to, you know, 0.01%. And some numbers, depending on different areas, they'll statistically get different numbers, but they're all very low. For, you know, for kids, it's a extremely low risk.
So what's the death rate of the flu virus?
About 1/10 of what COVID is.
Okay.
So, you know, it's not as deadly as COVID, but it, you know, but we know that because we've had so many more cases this year. So we've been able to get statistics on it. You know, but we've never really, I mean, nothing's ever stopped because of flu. We didn't shut down anything, you know, church or anything. And so we just accepted that risk and went on. And the difference now is that, you know, we've gotten into this, it's almost like a mass hysteria about it. And the risk is there, and it's important. But at the same time, I think that there's so much good news that we really should be a lot more optimistic than we are.
But I know there are a lot of people, especially older people and people with pre-existing, that, you know, are very concerned. I don't necessarily say hysteria, although it could be, but they're not going anywhere until this thing's over. But like I said, as I looked at the masses of people that I saw over the last week, I thought there's no hysteria around here. Right, seem to have the other attitude that they're not worried about it. They don't think it matters.
Well, I think that people respond to what they see. And no matter what the news media says, that's not our life experience. We're not seeing people falling over right and left around us with COVID. It's not happening. And in our area, the hospitals have plenty of capacity. You know, even if you go in the hospital, there's only a small percent of people that will die. A lot of people that go in are there for a day or two. And now there's so many things right on the verge. One of the other exciting treatments that's out there, and it's waiting for the emergency use authorization also, is the Regeneron product, which is what they call a polyclonal immunoglobulin, which basically is it is a passive vaccine where they make the antibody against the virus in humanized mouse cells, and basically they take the antibody and then they give you an injection of the antibody. So, you know, in the vaccine, you get the vaccine and you make your own antibody. In this, they make the immunoglobulin, the antibody, and they inject it in you. And that's a way that, I mean, it's like instantaneous vaccination. And that's good. That's almost here too. So that's a very positive thing.
So now I said before some of you came on that we want you to have the questions tonight and raise them. And if you have a question, don't be afraid to do this. That's the only way we can get your attention. And those of you who don't have your picture on, I don't know how we'll know your questions. But if you have a question, you know, raise it, and we're going to go with your question. So let me pause and say, does anybody right now have a question? Yeah, John Carpenter.
You see all these things about a bunch of shots and they're not at a low temperature. So what happens to the ones that you're seeing on TV?
I'm not sure, John. Ask me a different way.
Well, you see a lot of injection bottles going around.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that's not at minus temperature. So.
Well, a lot of those are unfilled. I mean, those are empty bottles.
Okay.
You know, because one of the things that they had to do, and this was a big deal, is they've been working hard to produce enough of these bottles because they've had to come up with billions. And the glass is special. The metal around the cap is special. You know, when you take a container down to 80 below zero, and then you raise it back up, one of the things that happens is a lot of times they explode. And it's got to be made with a special kind of valve on it. So the production of the vials has been, that's what you're probably seeing on TV, is where they're making the vials.
Thank you.
Dan, can you speak, I don't know if you've seen those charts of like the flu in the Southern Hemisphere, but what are your thoughts of going into flu season? Because like there was one of Chile and it's almost like flu didn't exist this year given all the precautions they were taking for COVID. But what are your thoughts on
I think
or the impact this could have on flu going forward?
I think that's going to be a side effect of all the precautions we're doing for COVID. I think we're going to see a dramatic drop in flu this year and respiratory viruses in general. You know, I took my flu shot already, and so I believe that's the right thing to do. but at the same time, I think the likelihood of it being exposed to it is diminished.
But could it have any kind of long-term impact on making flu less prevalent? Or is it just going to be a temporary blip?
I think it's temporary, but I think that one of the things that may have a long-term impact on flu is the way that the vaccine is being made for COVID. In doing the RNA vaccine, if we can find a way to make a more effective flu vaccine, then that may have a dramatic effect on flu. So I'm hopeful that there'll be a lot of spinoff from the technologies that are coming out. You know, right now I think there are 140 vaccines that are being tested in this country, and you know, worldwide I think there's about 350 different vaccines. And you know, the Chinese and the Russians are already vaccinating people with their own vaccines, but it's a little different way they do it. Over there, you don't really have a lot of choices. And so, you know, they just say, get in line, comrade. You know, and that's it. And so you get in line and you get your shot. And but I did see today where Brazil had been a testing center for the Chinese vaccine, and they put a halt to the testing in Brazil today because of an adverse event. And so I'm not sure exactly what that was. They didn't say, but it doesn't surprise me.
Someone else have a question? Just do a little wave. Ann?
Dan, two questions. First, I missed last week. What is RNA?
Okay, RNA is what it stands for is ribonucleic acid.
Okay.
And what that is.
Now you know.
Yeah.
Sure.
But basically it is the code that codes for the protein production that manufactures the new viruses in a cell. You know, in our cells, we have DNA, which is deoxyribonucleic acid. And some viruses are RNA, some are DNA. And it gets a little more complicated than that too. But basically, the SARS-CoV-2 virus is an RNA virus. It's a pretty large virus as far as the amount of RNA in it. It's, you know, each base pair that is in RNA basically codes for, it's like one gene, one section of a protein. But there's like 30,000 base pairs in the SARS-CoV-2 virus. But basically the way it works is the virus attaches to a cell, like a human cell, and it merges with the cell and the wall kind of joins in and the RNA goes into the cell and it takes over the manufacture of proteins. It basically is a self-destruct for the cell because it starts running crazy making virus protein. And the virus protein has this incredible ability to sort of pop back in place and create new viruses in our cell. And then when it fills up, it's usually like, you know, millions of viruses that will be produced inside one cell. It ruptures, kills the cell, and it's all released. And then the virus is out. And so it's a very fast production rate. And that's called the incubation period, really. That's the time it takes for the infection to start until the first virus is produced and released.
Okay, my second question. I'm all in for healthcare workers and nursing home residents and staff to certainly have the first dibs. Do you have any idea after that, after those people are inoculated, how will it be determined who gets it first? Are we going to have a mad rush on the pharmacies?
Like everything, of course, it'll be a mad rush. But I think if you just back off and chill out, it's like there'll be plenty to go around.
Okay.
You know, I mean, it's going to be like McDonald's hamburgers before you know it. There's going to be so much vaccine out there. And, you know, so I wouldn't be in a rush because of that. You know, they're going to have hundreds of millions. There's going to be a lot of people who don't want to get it. I mean, you know, everybody's not going to want it.
And you made me think of, for anybody else that wasn't with us last week, I noticed in the Inspire or on the website, you can click on and listen to last week's hour discussion with Dan. And this one is recorded too, and will also be available if you want to re-listen to, you know, listen again to any of these questions and answers. Somebody else want to go with a question? Okay, my turn again. Now, as we enter into the winter flu season, so you develop a fever, you develop an ache, you got a cough. How do you know if you got the flu or you got the COVID? That's going to be confusing, isn't it?
Oh, it is very confusing. And I think the thing is, you have to first think about, you know, what's your situation? Are you at risk as far as your own health goes? Are you at high risk or low risk? And if the answer is you're at low risk and you're not going to be around people who are at high risk, then it may not matter if you get tested. If you are either high risk yourself or you are around people who are at high risk, then getting tested, I think, is a prudent thing to do. And also, you know, there's still a lot of debate about exactly how to treat people. You know, one of the big things that's still out there is, you know, how much good things like, we talked a little bit about vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc, hydroxychloroquine. Hydroxychloroquine has been politicized. And there was a big study that was released this week in the Journal of the American Medical Association that basically was clear that hydroxychloroquine does not help if you have advanced disease. So that's not of any benefit. This question that's still open that has not been answered is there a benefit to hydroxychloroquine that is similar to Tamiflu with flu, in that it works very early in the viral stage? And, you know, that's still not been answered. They've not done a good study looking at that. But it's so political now, it's almost like they're not going to. I don't know. And, you know, there was an interesting thing that I had read today that the supercomputer that is in Oak Ridge that is normally used for all the Oak Ridge scientific stuff that they do has been basically put in to analyze everything about the virus, analyze patients' demographics, patient information, the virus structure, the way the proteins fold, and it goes through all known medicines to identify medicines that we have that may be used for something else that might be effective in treating COVID-19. And it's interesting because it found like 14 medicines that were potentially useful. And of those, vitamin D was high on the list, and vitamin C and zinc all showed, according to the computer, that they might be helpful. And but one of the ones that surprised me was melatonin. And when I look back, I thought I remembered that President Trump's physicians treated him with melatonin. And I look back and that's correct. They did. And so when they issued the list of medicines he was on, melatonin was one of them. And so, you know, I thought that's interesting. So, you know, I don't know. I think that we're going to see a lot.
When you say you got to take the hydroxychloroquine or the Tamiflu early on, but don't you have to have some symptoms before you know you have it?
Well, it's helpful,
I mean, can you be too late if you still have, by the time your symptoms show up?
Well, even if you take it late, it doesn't hurt. It just doesn't do any good. It's kind of useless. Hydroxychloroquine is a medicine that I've used in practice for many years. It's used a lot in rheumatic diseases, inflammatory diseases. And so it's interesting how, the side effects from it, I've never had a patient who we've had to stop it on. And I've probably used it a few hundred times. I don't even know how many, but especially in rheumatoid arthritis and lupus and scleroderma and some other connective tissue diseases. And one of the things that's also interesting is that in COVID-19, there's a group of people that go into what they call the long haulers, which is probably 20 to 40% of people who get it, depending on the study and everything, go into this sort of long tail of illness that goes out weeks and months. And those people, they're identifying a significant number that develop autoantibodies that are the same kind of autoantibodies that develop with rheumatic diseases like lupus and rheumatoid arthritis and the diseases I just mentioned, that it's almost like there's something that the virus is doing as it infects cells that tricks it and starts making antibodies against our own cells. And it shows that the first part of the disease, the viral part, is usually not too bad. I mean, most everybody gets over that. The harmful part, the deadly part, is the immunologic part, the part that happens after about 10 days. And that group of people, that's where you see the sickness. And if that goes askew and we start developing antibodies against our own cells, there's some people who go into this long haulers type syndrome, they call it. So it's lots to be learned.
Would those be people that say that they got it a second time because they got over the initial round, but they think they got it again? Was there really?
Maybe, but the number of people, we do know that it's possible to get it a second time, for sure, because what they've done is I think 4 people in the world right now have been documented to have it a second time. And, and that's 4 million out of, 150 million that we know of that have had it. There's probably more than that, but that's just how many we know. But they can tell it because they'll find somebody who they've identified the virus and they've sequenced the virus when they first get it. And then they come back sick again and they sequence the virus and it's a different virus. It's the same SARS-CoV disease. It's the same SARS virus, but it is a different actual virus. And so, we've got proof that you can get it again.
Okay. Anybody else have a question? Just speak out, unmute your thing, or just press your space bar on your computer or laptop and ask your question.
I've got congestive heart failure. Is that a big risk?
That's a risk. It is.
So I should talk to my doctor.
Yes. I mean, that's a risk factor for getting the disease and having a more serious course.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was just curious about the mutation that seems to be occurring. I know that there was a report out of Denmark that some animals had to be put down because of the mutation. And I just wonder how the current vaccinations are going to address that, or I just don't even know how to end that question.
Well, that is a question that is, in a lot of people's minds. But let me tell you first a little about the mutation. It's actually in minks. And, right now, I think Denmark has about, I read, 8 or 10 million minks. And the real worry was not that the minks got it, but some of the workers that handle the minks caught the mutation back from the minks into people. And so that's a concern there. And we know that the mutation changes the spike protein. And so it's not a perfect fit into the spike receptor like it was. It's just a little different. And since most of the vaccines are directed against the spike protein, there's a concern that if that mutation spreads, it could alter the effectiveness of the vaccines. And, I did see where they were going to cull the mink population in Denmark and kill all of them. They were getting rid of every one. And so that is a concern. And I think that they were, stopping a lot of the Denmark flights. But the problem is, apparently there's a lot of flights from London to Copenhagen. And so there's people going back and forth all the time. And I don't know how that's going to work, but that mutation is the first where we've seen it go from people back to animals and then animals back to people. So that's an important thing that has been seen in the last couple of weeks.
Dan, Emily wanted your thoughts on, and I think you may have touched on this last week, but the CDC guidelines and Thanksgiving. Yeah,
I think that it's one of those things where we have to develop our risk tolerance, and that's pretty much an individual thing. It's hard to give specific guidelines because, everybody deserves to have freedom. And, I kind of have a little bit of a libertarian leaning. And so, the idea of having people locked up or, not permitting travel, it goes against my grain to do that. But at the same time, I think being safe you've got to judge that by your own family. And the risk of it is real. There is, the virus is very contagious. We know that it spreads, especially when you mix households. So you bring in another household, like your sister from Oklahoma, different things where people come in from different areas. It's easy to spread that way. And if everybody has a pretty low risk for themselves, okay, if you get it, you get it. But you'd have to kind of be expecting that it's possible that you're going to get it. I know it'd be nice to have a hard and fast rule, but I don't think you can do that.
Yes, Sally.
First, thank you for sharing your expertise with us all these 2 weeks. We appreciate it. About the vaccine, you said you get one vaccine and then did you say 21 days later you get another one? So are you half protected?
What the literature says is you aren't protected until day 28, which would be 7 days after the second injection. Now, obviously, in reality, it's a gradual process. It's not like a switch. And so, but there's not enough information to say what that is exactly. We know it's got to be gradual. I mean, everything is gradual, just about. And so it's probably one where you start developing antibodies, and there are going to be some people who are better at developing antibodies. Some people are worse. You know, I know that one of the things I do is I give a lot of hepatitis B vaccine, and we always confirm that it works by checking antibody levels. And it varies quite a bit on how quickly, or sometimes even if, a person develops antibodies. I have perfectly healthy people who, after 3 hepatitis B doses, they don't have any immunity. And so it just is that way.
Anybody else?
Yeah, Don.
Yes, Don.
I just wanted to ask, is there going to be enough serum, Dan, for the third world countries?
I think there'll be plenty. I think it's the big problem with them is going to be actually the logistics of the refrigeration process. You know, getting the ultra cool freezers out and disseminated worldwide is going to be a challenge. And, you know, you're going to have, there's so many obstacles to overcome in many of these third world countries with corruption and all the other stuff they have to deal with, the geopolitical stuff they have going on. You know, there'll probably be people that don't have access to it, but it looks like the amount of vaccine that will be produced next year will be in the 3 billion dose range. And, you know, and it's going to be out there.
Are there any countries that have managed, small countries or whatever, that's managed to stay free of the virus?
Pretty free, yeah. I mean, Taiwan, which is right next to China, has done a great job. They shut down, and of course, Taiwan doesn't even exist to China, and so they don't even know what's there. It's just a black hole, and so, but they have very, very low counts. New Zealand has very low counts. Western Australia has very, very low counts. I think Western Australia hasn't had a case in 200 plus days. And so they just shut down. There are no flights, no trains, nothing that can get in Western Australia. And so you can definitely live in an isolated world and not get the virus. I think we knew that. There was an interesting thing that I had read back some time ago, where in the 1917 influenza pandemic, a little town called Littleton, Colorado, isolated. And I think for 2 years, they cut the train track. They went into Littleton. They cut the road. And basically, they had no cases. And then, you know, so there's a definite way to cut down the number of cases by cutting down movement.
Does one vaccine not require a cold environment?
I think there's more than one, actually. There's several that I think are more, they require refrigeration, but nothing in the below freezing zone. But I think one of the things is that as we look at the way these viruses are made, there's 4 basic types of vaccines that are being produced. And this one that is coming out first, probably the Pfizer one, is the same as the company called Moderna, which is an RNA vaccine also. The exciting part of this is it seems to be so much more protective. And you know, and that's really the name of the game in this. We know that the estimates are if we could get the herd immunity or the community immunity up to about 70%, it would stop the virus because it just wouldn't have a place to go. And, you know, and if we could actually vaccinate people and get their immunity level at 90%, that would shut it down. And I'm very optimistic that as we get this vaccine out, we're going to see the virus just melt.
That'd be a happy day.
Anybody else? Yes, Catherine.
I'm just wondering about having conversations with those anti-vaxxers that don't want to expose themselves or their children to vaccinations. What sort of logic would you use when speaking to them?
Well, first of all, it goes back to I'm kind of libertarian. And so if people don't want to take it, fine. I treat people that way with flu vaccine. I take my flu shot. But if people say, oh, I never take it, it's something's in it from the CIA and it causes brain control and whatever, it's like, I go, okay, it's no big deal. And I think that's the way this has to be treated too. The last thing we want to do is use this as an excuse to force something on people in a country where we're supposed to have the freedom to choose. We all know that smoking is harmful, but we don't arrest people for smoking yet. And, and it's like, if they would choose to do it, they choose to do it. And I think that's the way this has to be approached. If you have access to the vaccine and you want to be protected, then take it. And, and if you don't take it. And that's the way I feel about it.
Is there a difference between the infection rate and the positivity rate?
Yes, that's the difference between the infection and the case rate that we talked about a minute ago. We talked about it in pertaining to fatalities, but we know that you can get infected with the virus and not develop any symptoms. Any at all. Probably 30 or 40% of people who get the virus never have any symptoms. And we don't even really know how many that is. But it happens. And
That they can spread it.
not always, not always. That's the part that's really unclear. A lot of them can, but we don't know that some people just, they squash it and it doesn't do anything. Some people, it grows and then our body deals with it and they can spread it, but it doesn't make them sick. It's not, the same for everybody. And, one of the things that seems to be really important is the size of the inoculum. The inoculum is basically the amount of virus you get when you get sick, when you get the infection. And so if you get a big bunch of virus from some place that's absolutely loaded with virus, like a little snotty-nosed kid, then, you might get really sick. But if you're wearing a mask and they're wearing a mask and the amount of virus that gets through both masks to you is relatively small, you might have an asymptomatic case. But that size of the viral inoculum is critical in disease production.
How libertarian are you? Because if you want to say I'm going to drive at any speed, or I'm not going to worry about my blood alcohol level.
Yeah, I think that that gets into an interesting thing that I've thought about with this is that I think that we need rules for society, and I agree with that. But if we want to really, if we could cut traffic fatalities down to zero by lowering the speed limit to 5 miles an hour.
Yeah, John would love that.
We could absolutely stop it. And every life saved is valuable. And so why not just cut down the speed limit to 5? And so that way we'd all be safe.
You'd go to sleep.
Well, okay, but and I think we should probably all wear helmets. Even at home, we should wear helmets. So, I think that's why I'm saying there's risk inherent in living. And I believe in being safe. I believe in standards. I believe but at the same time, I don't think we have enough room in the prisons to arrest people for not refusing to take a vaccine.
No.
And I think we've got to somehow allow choice. And this is one of those cases where, it could be an exercise in what is allowed to be controlled and what's not. And I don't, I'm not smart enough to know all the answers. I just know that, I think that all the freedom we can retain, I'm all for it.
Somebody has COVID and they get over it and they have the antibodies, can they still be a carrier and give it to someone else?
The answer to that is most likely no. We've got, they looked at thousands of people, and the CDC changed their guidelines from a testing-based protocol to a symptom-based protocol, which basically says the day you test positive for the virus, for SARS-CoV-2, that you should be isolated for 10 days. And if you have no fever and you're not on fever-reducing medicine and your symptoms are mild, you can return to your normal activities at 10 days. Now, there was a case of a patient that I read about that was in Chicago. That was a patient who had a type of cancer that was an immune cell, a B-cell lymphoma, that basically was on chemotherapy and their immune system was very impaired. And they got COVID. They tested positive for SARS-CoV-2, and they remained infectious at day 120. And they did all these special plaque assays and everything to be sure it wasn't just a positive test. They had active virus they were spitting out. But their immune system couldn't stop it. It was too impaired. And so we know that in those kind of situations, it's possible to be a long-term carrier of the virus. But those are very rare situations and not what we would encounter mostly.
Would that be the same answer you give if you test negative? Would that be that you really don't have the virus and can't spread it? Or could you test negative and still spread it?
Well, on the day you test negative, you are not spreading it. Now, the next day is a different day.
Yeah, right.
And so, but on the day you test negative, you're negative. You don't have it. But you could be in the incubation period for the infection. And so tomorrow you could become positive. And that's why I think working toward cheap, rapid tests that we can do at home is very helpful. Now, I think we're going to outstrip the need for that by the vaccines. And so, I personally think the vaccinations are going to just be the home run hit for this disease.
Somebody else, I have lots of questions, but somebody else jump in there. Going back to the positivity rate, which I assume means out of every 10 people tested, if one person tests positive, that's a 1% positivity rate. Is that correct?
Right. That's right now. The statistics that I looked at today, which I check every day, I get an email with it for Rutherford County because that's where I take care of most of my patients. The positivity rate right now in Rutherford County is 4.3%. It's about 7%, I think, in downtown Nashville. Some parts of downtown Nashville are higher than that, but the average is about 6 or 7%.
7 out of every 10 people
that test positive.
Wow.
Yeah, but you have to remember, there's most of the people who test are testing for a reason. A lot of them have symptoms. It's not people just going around randomly testing people, looking, it just random selection of the population. It's a mixture.
Well, on the news tonight, forgive me for watching the news because it's nothing but makes you pessimistic, but it said the mayor of New York announced that if the positivity rate in New York City gets back up to 3%, it's like 2.75. Then if it gets up to 3%, he's going to start shutting everything down at 10 o'clock at night.
He's a very wise man. No, I'm kidding. I'm being sarcastic, but no, I think that he's a little bit overcome with himself, and he's got a lot of power, and he likes to use it. And he also is the one who said that any vaccine that was approved under President Trump, he would never allow in New York. And so,
Politics. Somebody else got a question? Wave your hand. And I get to go again?
Sure.
So if you were the mayor of Nashville, Tennessee, or the governor of Tennessee, and you could put out the rules about dealing with this in terms of wearing masks or not wearing masks or shutting down or not shutting down, what would you do?
Well, there's I think you have to look at decisions were made initially when we didn't know what was going to happen. We've got a lot more information now than we knew. And we know better how to take care of it. We know the people who are vulnerable, and we know how to protect them better. And I think that it's a learning curve. And it's hard to find fault with people who made decisions early on that we might not agree with. But I think that most of the people in charge at every level, honestly, I think are trying. They don't want to go down and look like they contributed to a lot of people dying, and they don't want to look like they don't care. And so it's tough. But I think at this point, the things that I would do are to emphasize that, we know it's a aerosol transmitted infection. We know that a small number of people get sick and an even smaller number of people die. And I think doing the things that improve those numbers are good advice. One of the things that you can tell that's really interesting is how the city of Tokyo, Japan has done, but their culture is different. They don't have mandates, but their culture is quiet. They like their physical distancing. They do that normally. They're used to wearing masks. They wear them a lot of the winter, every winter. That's common. They're quiet. When they get on their commuter trains, nobody talks. I was reading about cultural differences, and the infection rate there is, you would think they have 33 million people in Tokyo. And you would think it would be like crazy high, but the number of hospitalizations is very low. And it's probably because the inoculum that people get is a very small dose of virus. But when they check the seropositivity in Tokyo, it's very high. It's like 46% of the people have been exposed to virus. But yet, they just don't get sick. And so there's learning from that. I believe that it's wise to wear a mask. I think that, the goal is let's get the vaccine out and get the vaccination before we get sick. Because if we don't, this virus is not going away just with time. It'll be a long time. It'll be 3 or 4 years, 2 or 3 years, who knows? But I think the vaccine is the way out. But until then, let's don't get the infection. Let's wear masks. Let's do the social distancing. Let's wash hands. Let's improve our ventilation. Let's do as much as we can outdoors. Let's do all the things we need to do. But at the same time, the risk is relatively low. Did that
Sure.
answer? I don't know.
Cyril's got a question.
I heard an interview with someone who was a soldier and survived the 1918 epidemic, and he said that it was actually about 5 years before society got back to shaking hands and hugging and doing the things that they had done before the virus. So what do you think the next, say, 3 years or so looks like as far as a timeline for social interaction and the progress of trying to deal with this?
I think Americans have a pretty short memory. And I think once this gets out of the news, it's going to go away. I think that it will have some long-term effects and people not feeling self-conscious about wearing masks in the wintertime. I think that a lot of people will continue to do that, and that's not a bad thing. You know, wearing a mask when you're out at the store or when you are in social situations, you come to church, nothing wrong with that. I think washing your hands is a good thing. I think that, you know, we're going to learn some very positive things from this. But it'll have, I think, more of a long-term economic impact than it does a behavioral impact. Once this disappears, we'll forget.
Anybody else?
How are hospital therapies improved? You say fewer people are dying. What's causing that?
There's a lot of debate about that, John. I tell you, you know, there are good treatments. I mean, we do know for a fact that steroids save lives, and you know, dexamethasone, which is the steroid that's used, is dirt cheap, and we know that it works. We know that remdesivir was what's called a nucleoside analog, which is it's a way to fool the production of the virus in the cell to screw it up so that it doesn't make the proteins right. And that is a drug that was actually developed as a treatment for AIDS, but wasn't that good for AIDS. And it's been tested for flu. It's not that good for flu. And it's turning out it's got some use in COVID-19, but it's not that good for COVID-19. And it's about, you know, $3,000 for the dose. And it's probably not going to be a long-term useful product. One of the most important medicines that we're figuring out is actually oxygen. We don't think about oxygen as being a medicine, but it is. And I think that that's one reason that a lot of people in these foreign countries are dying is they don't have the availability of concentrated oxygen. And that keeps a lot of people out of the hospital. So the people that get sick, you know, basically are on that. The other thing is I think we're recognizing the role of vitamin D and zinc. That's important. And, you know, a lot of the Europeans, especially in Spain, the studies there have found a big effect in getting vitamin D levels to normal and decreasing the risk of people going into even to ICU or dying. You know, vitamin C is helpful, but it's not clear how much it's helpful, but probably a couple of grams a day. Zinc is helpful. You know, the other thing is that I think we're going to see is we've learned when we first started with this, the idea was we thought it would help people as their oxygen level dropped to quickly put them on the respirator. But it turns out that kills people. And so that was a bad idea. But we didn't know it until we learned. And the other thing they found out is even when you are just getting out of breath and the lung disease is developing, that when you're prone, when you're laying on your stomach, your lungs ventilate better. A lot of people don't think about that because, I mean, we never really measured it. It sounds kind of easy, but somehow we just missed it. And and we know that people do better if they're kept prone, whether they're actually on the respirator or not. So things like that we've learned how to handle, I think are good. There is another medicine that's an autoantibody that's developed that affects the cytokine system that is used, but it's pretty expensive and it doesn't have it's not great. But I think that the combination of everything is, and also I suspect the virus is changing. It's not the same as it was in the beginning. We know that the virus changes every time it comes out of a single person. There's mutations, but those, the virus doesn't have a cognitive strategy. It's not an intelligent being. It's not looking for ways to spread and thinking about it. What it does, it's called a natural selectivity. And so it's kind of like if you throw seeds out on the grass, the ones that can germinate the easiest do the best. And that's kind of what happens with the virus.
Susan, you got a question? Let me say this. Dr. Rudd said that, we're past our hour, but he said he had some time. So those of you that want to stay and continue, we will. If anybody needs to leave, feel free to check out because we committed to an hour, but he's generous and he's got his time to stay. So Susan, go ahead.
We're low on power. I'll run up in a second. But Dan, so some of these cures for this disease sound very expensive. Is everybody going to be allowed to have these? What if they have no insurance, they have no anything? Does that mean they're not going to get the helpful treatments? Or is there discrimination here?
No, and in fact, the best treatment is probably the vaccine, and it'll be free.
Yeah.
It's all paid for. And so the vaccine is totally free.
But right now, if one poor person were sick and one president was sick.
Well, that makes a big difference.
I thought so.
Yeah, it does. It does. President Trump was able to get the Regeneron product, which is an amazing product. It's a great product, but it's not available yet because the FDA hasn't issued the emergency use authorization yet. But it's imminent. They're going to, and when it's approved to be released under the emergency use authorization, anybody can get it. But right now, the big problem is all the stuff that's available has kind of iffy results.
Yeah.
And, and it's like, I don't even know what I would take.
Yeah.
Dexamethasone, except the steroid, which is old and it's cheap. Dexamethasone is probably, you could take the course of it for 10 cents. It's very cheap.
Okay, thank you. That was a concern. And we love and miss you.
Thank you.
Anybody else got a question?
Yeah, thank you.
One of my final ones is early on in this, we emphasized flattening the curve, and we talked about always washing your hands. And I was paranoid about picking up the virus off any surface, including my mail or my newspaper. And now they say you don't have to wash items from the grocery store. But my question is, how important is flattening the curve idea still today? How important is the surface cleaning and picking up the virus off surfaces?
Well, I think the surface issue is probably very low on the priority list. Of course, if you're in a preschool with a bunch of these little kids, it's probably a lot more important. If you're in, a regular store or a restaurant, it's probably less important. It's hard to say it's not important at all, but it's definitely, lower on the scale.
If you're in church, passing the communion trays.
Yeah, I think that it's the person-to-person contact. It's not the, I still think the disposable communion cups are probably not a bad idea, to do that. A lot of those, that's what a lot of people do now. And I think that's probably just from, people feeling safe and secure, it's probably a good way to do it. I think one of the things that is really interesting too is that, there's some spinoff from all the research that's gone on through this. And one of the things I was reading about that I thought I would mention that I thought was really interesting is that they have found that there's a section of the protein in the spike of the virus that when they isolate it, it activates pain receptor blocking. And so it's like a new class of pain medicines are in development now because of this virus research that are non-addicting, non-narcotic. And I thought that was a pretty interesting thing that I just ran across the other day. And I thought there's going to be a lot more like that. There's going to be things that we learn from this that we did not anticipate. And so
the things that come out of the bad.
Yes, there will be. And I think that it's hard to know what all that'll be, but I'm convinced it'll be. The speed that we're developing this vaccine is really unheard of. I mean, to go from, zero to a vaccine in 10 months, I mean, it's amazing. And I think that, normally they can, just to do the next year's flu vaccine, they're already working now on next year's flu vaccine. And, and we don't just have one vaccine. We've got, I think 4 or 5 in phase 3 trials and, 140 being tested in this country. It's really amazing. I mean, we're seeing a lot of good things and a lot of reason to be optimistic.